Mr. Boshoff, thank you for joining us. You are one of the head honchos of Orania. How long have you been in the town of Orania?
I've been living in Orania from 1997. I've been involved with it from the very start. But I was a young guy with a lot of ideas at that time and involved in politics. Transition negotiations, the Kempton Park processes and so on, and still had some involvement in those processes. But after completing a term on what was at that time called the Volksstaat Council, a constitutional body that investigated the implementation of self-determination, I moved here with the family to really implement it, to put it in practice.
Okay, so we've all heard the news that Orania is the white-only town. What's the actual criteria to live here?
The white-only story has more to do with the people saying it than with us doing it. Because it's not a racial matter in the first or last instance for us. It's much cultural, but in the final instance a community matter. We are people sharing a lot of important preferences, be it religious, linguistic, cultural, historical. We're a cultural community. In fact, there's sort of two main questions. One thing is, it's an intentional community looking at the future. Do you share the intention?
Yeah.
Do you share the intention of an autonomous Afrikaner community that looks after itself in the future?
Yeah.
That's the one question. And the other question is, how are you going to make it work? How are you going to afford your living in Orania? Because we don't look after people look after themselves.
Yeah, no social
So
welfare.
Sort of idealistic and practical question.
Yeah.
And then there's of course a lot of matters. Do you share the cultural references and so on? But all those could be negotiated.
Yeah.
If you will probably meet them. If I'm a beer brewer from Bavaria, and I taught myself Afrikaans, and I wanted to be part of the community, that's possible.
Yeah.
If there's many examples. So every rule has its exceptions, but the main thing is, do you share the intention? Do you relate with the community? And do you have a plan to make a living of it?
So, I think a lot of people have this misguided sense of what Orania is. It's our first time. We arrived last night late, so this is the first time we're seeing it during the day. And it strikes me it is a normal middle-class suburb / town. It doesn't reek of opulence. It doesn't reek of security features. I don't see high walls and electric fences or things like that. The average Oranian seems to be a very working professional class individual who moves here, but there's no airs and graces about it. It's a working person's town. Is that fair to say?
It is absolutely. The whole question of labour and of self-sufficiency in terms of labour is central to our way of thinking about what we do and who we are. If white people in South Africa ended up in a disadvantaged position, it is because we founded our existence on a split kind of system between white bosses and black labourers. That was never sustainable, and it's even less sustainable now. So what we try to do in Orania is to really confront that question and say to ourselves, there's not high and low labour. There's not good and bad, or obviously there is good and bad work. We try to do good work, but there's not some things that's beyond
beneath
or
you.
below or beneath us.
Yeah.
We tackle everything that's to be done, and that makes a difference in the sort of self-concept, in the way the population is set up and who are part of it. So yeah, we are a working community, working class in many senses. But even that, what's working class? I'm working class in the sense that I work every day. The same with you.
Well, you're not the masters of production. You're not the bossy.
Yeah.
You're actually the guy. You're the labourer on the ground, which I suppose explains why it's distinctly middle class. It's not opulence as the town of the bussies.
Exactly. Some people do more coordination than moving around of things.
Yeah.
But even that that's doing some important work.
Very interesting, very interesting. So we were here last night and we walked around and we spoke to Joost, one of your envoys, and he says very interestingly on Orania that it's required that you look after the town but also look after yourself. So he says you don't have this concept of like the police walking around like keeping everybody in line. You're required to look after your own security, but in doing that look after the security of others. So it's very much the community protecting itself but also protecting those in the community. A very should we say foreign aspect to many towns and cities around South Africa now. How do you see that playing out in the future as the town grows? Do you think that idea is sustainable?
Well, two answers to that, and both to the affirmative. I believe it is sustainable. One reason is because it's actually a surprise how little things early in something's history sort of grows with it. I think this culture of looking after ourselves, taking responsibility for ourselves, but also, in a sense, looking after each other. If that takes root, it would grow with the tree.
Yeah.
It would be part of this tree that we are growing here. But the other thing, it's what's needed in these days, and it makes sense to do it this way. It's in actual fact the natural thing to do. It's the next thing to do is to look after your own affairs. There's nobody else doing it, and in the final instance, it's in your own interest.
Yeah.
So our security is the feet on the ground. The fact that this town is inhabited by members of the same community with the same priorities and same interests, and sort of sharing the same values. Why wouldn't people steal from each other? Well, just because you don't do it.
It's a bit like our Airbnb last night. We arrived late and he opened the door for us, he welcomed us in, he says, the keys are there but you don't need to lock because nothing ever happened here. So we didn't at the end of the day, because there's a real sense that everyone knows each other, so that trust is quite high to some extent.
As it grows, the opportunities for whatever kinds of criminality or whatever may grow as well, but I think one looks after it in the spirit. It's the eyes of everybody and the feet on the ground that ensures security.
So just just a question from my side. I think we understand that Orania is built around a common culture, language, religion. But this is South Africa. South Africa is a fading state. So it also has to be built around practicalities that are not found elsewhere in the world. Practicalities being literally off the grid. Not because you want to, but because you are forced to. Because services don't work in South Africa. Which is more difficult to build? The community or the physical infrastructure that makes that community possible?
It's both difficult and both easy, in the sense that as soon as next phases of infrastructure is constructed and implemented, it's also populated. There's a huge interest of people wanting to come here. So of course it's a challenge to fund and to pay for new infrastructure. We're not supported by national budgets or provincial or whatever kinds of budgets. It's all from the community itself, from people supporting it. So it is difficult. It was especially difficult getting out of the blocks. It's a sort of growth curve. It's getting easier now. We can do bigger chunks of land in every next phase that we tackle at the moment. Building the culture for it, on the one hand, comes naturally because it speaks to something very deep in our people's minds and hearts, living the kind of life that we do. But it also needs cultivation. It also needs thinking. It also needs engagement, and to really own up to the culture that is what Orania represents.
So I find it very interesting that I'm sure the viewers will be able to hear. We are next to a road that's very busy. Certainly when we arrived last night, we very jokingly said we were very disappointed that there wasn't a big wall around Orania, and also a big moat and a fort and a drawbridge coming down going, only ye whites will pass. Like, it didn't really exist. There's actually free access in and out the town. So to all intents and purposes, when we went from the last town to this town, there was no real kind of defining characteristic that was like, oh, welcome to Orania, this autonomous zone. Now, I suppose that in itself is, well, we were really surprised. So we asked, like, why Orania? And the answer that we got actually was a little bit surprising. They said they set up Orania in the northwest, or the Northern Cape, so no one lives here. And we actually drove yesterday for an hour and a half and saw nothing apart from 2 sheep. So the idea that nobody lives here actually was very accurate, right? Nobody lives here.
Yeah.
So we were discussing earlier why you set up here. Well, that's one reason, because no one lives here. The other reason you said when we were discussing is because the terrain around here is quite harsh, but that harshness cultivates the people that are here. These are people that want to be here, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Can you elaborate on that for the viewers? I mean, it's a very interesting idea.
It got different sides. One is the perspective of demography. And demography is obviously more than population statistics. It's not just a matter of number. It is numbers, but it's also numbers over time in space. And the Afrikaner population, the broader white population in South Africa, but the Afrikaner population as well, is a very small minority spread out over the whole of South Africa, and being previously dominant and easily recognized. That's a precarious position to be. We're not that loved in South Africa for historical reasons, and a lot of propaganda that people built around it. But that's our demographic position. So how do we answer to that? Especially after being disempowered relatively to the broader population after 94, which power levers do we have? Just about none. An amount of economic leverage. That's about it. And even that's not so much, because it's always in people's private hands according to their private priorities, etc.
Yeah,
so
it's not there for racial priorities.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
But as a community, what do we do? You get out of the way of the oncoming train. You get out of the you move to where there's the least demographic pressure on you. So look at a relatively empty piece of land. If it's on a river, a big river, you're doing what civilizations has done over centuries. Settle a new city with all the potential to look after your people, and just dig in, do the work. So it's hard, but it needs to be hard.
Yeah.
Nobody said it's easy to live. Maybe sometimes as a fruit of the work of previous generations, it seems easy to live.
Yeah.
But even that's an illusion. It's always hard to live. And if one has the opportunity and even the voorrecht.
Fortitude.
No, the opportunity, but yeah, obviously the fortitude to take on the hard life. It's actually a formative thing.
Yeah.
And a culture that's built on that, a community that's built on tackling hard problems and solving them.
Yeah.
That may be a good culture. That may be very good fruit.
I think it's a culture that will exist far longer than others who don't.
They got a stake in it.
Do that sort of thing. So on this particular channel, Byron and I talk about the fragmentation of South Africa. We think the nation of South Africa is, as we spoke before, an empire for the most part, and it's going to fragment over time. So therefore, what happens? You need pioneers to build order at a local level, and Orania is by far one of the best examples we've seen of that.
In fact, South Africa has fragmented. We look at it from this point to say South Africa has logically passed. Maybe not chronologically yet,
Right.
but logically it's passed. It's passed its sell-by date. It's done.
Yeah.
And how do you know it? Quest Malan says the three things that makes up a state, a successful state, is law and order, which we don't have that much of anymore. A sort of unifying ideology, which has been South Africa first at some time. It has been rainbowism in the new dispensation. There's just nothing in that space anymore. It's transformatism, but that's an exclusive kind of ideology. So there's not a unifying ideology. And physical networks, road networks, rail networks, service delivery networks, which are all
They're all breaking.
they're all breaking up. And the prime example of the breakup of networks is Eskom. And it's not only because it's so acutely experienced when they turn it off and all the generators have to run in the background and all that. It's a way of really sabotaging the coherence of the South African system. There is no South African system left if you turn off the power. And we are experiencing that on a continual basis. So South Africa as a unity belongs to the past. What are we doing? You could leave and just get it off your back, or you could start recreating on a more federalist basis, on a more autonomous and look after yourself, take care of yourself, responsibility for your own affairs kind of basis, and that's what we are doing.
Very interesting.
Just really last question. It's 20 minutes. I don't want to keep this.
Yeah, no, I don't have any more questions. I want to ask on camera.
Okay. All right. I think, Mania, thank you. That's very kind.